BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, is too much expected of England's land use framework?
There is a danger that too much onus will be placed on the framework, but I think it's a start.
More on that later. Let's start then with food prices, which are up and driving inflation. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is up 3% in the year to January, but some basics have gone up by more. Butter, for instance, went up by 18%, eggs were up 4% and beef up 5%. Is this then good news for farmers who often tell us they're not being paid enough for the food they produce? Dr. David Adamson, Associate Professor in International Agriculture at the Royal Agricultural University.
Not necessarily. A couple of things. Food prices, 46% of all food is actually imported from overseas. So we are an international world. It depends what's driving up that CPI at the moment. Additionally, farmers also experience significant increases in their input costs. And so any gain they do get in prices, they'll be clawing back the costs they've already been paid for. Don't forget that a lot of farmers forward sell, therefore they're locked in particular prices, and they may not actually gain the increase in CPI due to the large number of players along the supply chain.
If we take butter as an example, that's gone up by 18% in a year, which is a lot. How much roughly would you expect farmers to see of that price increase realistically?
I would have said around about 2 to 3%. Don't forget the supermarkets will take a share, the processors along the way, and they are experiencing a fair amount of feed costs, which have gone up substantially as well.
Many farmers are pointing out that a lot of their costs have gone up and that we're also in the middle of a transition as we move away from direct farm support and to a system of public money for public goods. Would you expect that over the next few years to be reflected in prices for consumers?
It's going to have far more to do with the international marketplace. As I mentioned, 46% of all food consumed is offshore. That means you're competing against those people, other markets, and different players in the market. Consumers have a set amount of choices they like to use, but they've also got discretionary budgets. And as their real incomes are still struggling to keep pace with CPI, how they spend their money does not necessarily reflect an increase in total income for farmers.
We hear from many farmers on this programme who will say that fundamentally we're not paying enough for food, given how much it costs to produce.
That's probably very correct. We have downward pressures on food for very good political reasons around the world. We'd like to subsidise food all over the place and dump it on the market. That drives down the prices. And governments always get very concerned if food prices get too high too quickly. So you do find there's a lot of pressure to put downward pressure on prices, not only from the markets, but also from competitive suppliers who are dumping food on the market. In economics, we'd like to think the market works perfectly. Unfortunately, it's a flawed beast. We have a great desire to produce goods that are grown locally with the expectations that, the local food producer is the best and our food is wonderful. We have a highly competitive international market that's very different focused. Since being in the UK, I've seen very much almost a boutique style of farming here, producing for the local area. Whereas I come originally from Australia, where 80% of our income is generated from exports. So the notions in dealing with export markets here are fundamentally different. You've just gone through Brexit, and currently the UK government is considering going back to the same biosecurity protocols with the EU to deal with those short-term inflationary pressures that occurred during Brexit, where people found it harder to export and import goods because they had to learn a whole new set of biosecurity protocols. Costs were associated with that. So the learning process of dealing with markets takes time. Markets are, from an economist's point of view, far more beneficial. However, food generally is incredibly cheap because there's a large amount of produced. Every now and then it gets dumped onto the market. At times of great shortages, the prices skyrocket dramatically, and this causes all sorts of knee-jerk reactions where you see markets suddenly with tariffs going in, export restrictions going on, trying to keep the prices low for domestic consumers.
Dr. David Adamson from the Royal Agricultural University. Now, a topic familiar to this programme, a row over a solar farm project. But this week we're considering the government's land use framework for England, which is currently out for consultation. So what impact might that have on such disputes? Well, the proposed project, East Pye in South Norfolk, is 2,700 acres in 10 different locations. Local residents who object to the scheme have set up their own group called Block East Pye. They say they're not Nimbys, but that the current plans will directly impinge on both residents and wildlife. Anna Hill spoke to David Hook, Norfolk trustee of the countryside charity CPRE and chair of one of the local parish councils.
It's a landscape at present which is tranquil, rural, attractive, very popular with visitors and locals alike, footpaths well used, very, very nice landscape. There will be continuous sections of land covered by solar panels and associated infrastructure for many miles. 22 kilometres of footpaths will have solar panels along one side or both sides, and many more kilometres will have views of solar panels.
David Hook says local people recognise green energy has to be produced. As a trustee of the countryside charity CPRE, he believes there are better ways of using solar panels on existing buildings rather than farmland.
No, I'm definitely not a NIMBY. Both CPRE and Hemphill Parish Council have a policy that we want to decarbonise energy production. But we believe that there's a better way of doing it. CPRE has commissioned research with the UCL Energy Institute, and they have demonstrated that by 2050, if solar energy production from artificial surfaces, roofs, etc., is maximised, we can produce 117 gigawatts from those sources without needing any solar on land. We're not anti-green energy on any level. This is just not the best way to do it. It may be the cheapest and it may be the easiest, but it's not the best.
A spokesperson from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero told us even in the most ambitious scenarios, solar would still occupy less than 1% of the UK's agricultural land, less than occupied by golf courses. We're considering ways to ensure communities who live near new clean energy infrastructure can see the benefits of this. Well, Conservative peer Lord Fuller told me he's argued in the House of Lords for best and most versatile agricultural land to be legally protected from having any solar panels built on it to maintain food security.
There's a national balance here, the appropriate balance between energy security and food security. The government has already told us that under the land use framework, grades 1 and 2 land would be somehow exempted. But they say one thing and do another. The Heckingham proposals in Lincolnshire, the Sunnaker proposals in Cambridgeshire have significant quantities of grade 1 and 2 land. So this is why I felt it was so important to, regardless of what the land use framework may say, which is only ever going to be advisory in any event, that we legislated to require Great British Energy, which is one of the cornerstones of the Labour Party manifesto, to take these delicate issues, the balance between food and energy security, into account.
Lord Fuller. We contacted the developer of East Pye Solar, Island Green Power. In a statement, they said the development will comply with biodiversity net gain rules to boost biodiversity by a minimum of 10%. They added that they will sow grassland between and under panels, with some areas being grazed, restore hedgerow gaps, maintain vegetative buffers, install bird and bat boxes and create new woodland blocks. But David Hook, who chairs Hemphill Parish Council, says even with landscape and wildlife mitigation, the impact of the solar panels themselves, which will be 4.5 metres high at points, will be significant.
4.5 metres is up to the soffit, second-storey height of a two-storey house, more or less. If they can be hidden behind hedges, I would be very much surprised if that could be the case. And also a few bird boxes here and there. Really, it doesn't do the job. They are not attractive features. They cannot be hidden. Let's have a proper plan, not just leave it to an individual company to get involved with individual landowners to cook up a scheme. Let's have some kind of a proper land use framework where things are done in the right place in the right way.
David Hook. Island Green Power say the height of the tracker panels will only be extended to 4.5 metres for part of the day, and other panels will be between 2.5 and 3.5 metres high. The company says the project will ensure all prime agricultural land is avoided, and there'll be another round of community consultation in the summer.
Anna Hill in Norfolk there. Well, while Defra was preparing the consultation, it spoke to groups of farmers. That was facilitated by Alex Inman, Professor of Agricultural Practice at Exeter University, who told me it's crucial that farmers are involved in these decisions.
The farmers that took part in our discussions really welcomed the opportunity to meet directly with Defra policymakers. And it was certainly a refreshing process, and I think the farmers involved were very positive towards it.
We've been talking about the land use framework and the way we use land in this country most of this week here on Farming Today, and it is sometimes difficult to work out what impact this might have on the average farm. Did farmers approach it in that way? Yes,
scepticism. Farmers feel as though they're being asked to do a lot. They're being asked to produce food, produce flood attenuation services for society, more habitat, a place to sequestrate carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So farmers are not understandably somewhat confused about what to do. They're very welcoming regarding the opportunity to discuss these matters with people who make decisions.
And when farmers or local communities are making decisions, then how might the framework help?
I think that's still very much an open question. In my view, there is a desperate need for an opportunity for people from different perspectives, farmers, the conservationists, the scientists, the policymakers, the food technology experts, food geneticists, consumer organisations, to get together to work out a long-term strategy for how we manage our land.
So we've just heard this row over a proposed solar farm, this time in Norfolk. How would the framework help in that situation?
I think ideally the land use framework will provide a useful, scientifically driven basis on which people can come together to discuss how to use land. So I would hope the framework would provide the platform for a sensible discussion between those two parties that you outline.
So, in fact, it could almost come up with a formula for instance, if you have a problem with too many nutrients in a river, it will stop, for instance, a grouping of more chicken farms in that area?
Potentially, yes. Certainly provide the basis, again, as I say, for a scientifically driven discussion around how best to use the land in a locality.
Are we in danger of hanging too much on this framework and hoping that it will solve all these difficult problems of what to do with what is, after all, a finite resource?
Yes. In short, that there is a danger that too much onus will be placed on the framework. Managing land sustainably for our generation and for future generations is going to involve a whole range of ducks being lined up, international trade policy, geopolitical ramifications beyond these shores. So any domestic framework will not be able to incorporate everything that we would like. But I think it's a start. Very much hope and pray the framework will become a place where people can begin, hopefully, to have trusted discussions about what to do.
Professor Alex Inman. Do let us know your thoughts on England's land use framework, or indeed the slightly different versions of the idea in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. You can email us. We're farming.today@bbc.co.uk, or you can tweet us on X, where we are at BBC Farming Today. But that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.